against Brubaker's research. It just shows some of it flimsy. Yes.
Really?
So certain manuscripts.
Can you point me to a scholar who shows that what Brubaker says is untrue?
Yeah, I can.
When Brubaker shows the corrections that have been made in the Quran, and the difference between the Quranic manuscripts and today's accepted Quran,
Yes.
the Quran which is usually recited today.
Yeah. So, for example, one most important thing is that they look at certain vowels. For example, the vowels can be written in different ways. So the alif can be written in different ways. So Brubaker says just because it's written differently in both places, the important point is he doesn't realize that it's pronounced the same.
Okay.
For us, the Quran is a recitation. The very term Quran means to recite too.
Yeah,
Hear me out. I'm telling you why it's different. Why Brubaker's research doesn't stand up to scrutiny.
So he shows where things have been inserted or deleted and that kind of thing.
Yeah, he looks at. So
it's
he looks
not just an alif or something like that, like you say. Which You might say, oh well, it's just one vowel or whatever, like that.
No, but because you haven't looked.
Whole words have been
added
or erased.
The whole words which have been added and removed. What he doesn't realize is that the Quran is actually revealed in 7 different recitations, not just one recital. Yes. So he needs to take that into consideration before he actually makes a statement that this is.
But didn't Osman standardize the Quran on just one recitation?
No, that's a different thing. You're talking about. There's a difference between the qira'at, which is still.
He said you've got to write it in the Qurayshi dialect. Okay.
Yeah.
So there's only one way, according to Osman.
Yeah. So the 7 modes of recitation is not that Qurayshi dialect thing. That's different. Okay. That's why I'm saying you need to understand the nuances about researching about this topic. Without that, you won't be able to. And this is exactly the mistake that DCCI make. Because what they do is they listen to certain statements from other scholars, and they do not even realize what these scholars were talking about. So when you talk about the 7 modes of recitation, this is the different ways in which it can be recited. So it can be different words being substituted for other words. It can be, for example, a word which might be used in a different way. The same word might be used in a different way.
There are still 7 different ways of reciting the Quran?
Yes, still to this day.
Okay.
There you go. So all this Hafs, Warsh, Qalun, all these different ways of reciting, the modes of recitation, is still active to this day.
So you're saying those, they're called Qirat, okay? Am I right? So it's saying they're called Qirat, okay? Are you saying that those Qirat are actually exactly the same as the Roof, I think it's called, isn't it? Right, which is what the ways in which, when Muhammad said you can recite the Quran in 7 different Roof, is that the correct Arabic term, yeah?
Yes.
So you're saying that Qirat is the same as Roof?
No, I'm not saying it's the same.
Okay.
I'm saying the Qira'at, then inside the Qira'at there is these different ahruf, which shows the reasoning for these differences within that. So they're 2 different things, not the same thing. But the important point is this: all these 7 Qira'at was already revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You see, in his time, it wasn't something that was invented later on. Like for example, if you look at the Catholic book and the Protestant book, you don't even agree about the number of books in there. Yes? So the Protestants say we have 66 only. The Catholics say no, we have 73 books.
Yeah, so the Catholics accept all the 66 plus some more.
All the 73, yes. More, That's what I'm saying. They do not even agree upon the number of books, let alone whether there are mistakes in it. So if you look at scholars like Bart Ehrman, who are actually scholars of the New Testament and who research the history of the preservation of these books, they say this person is not some layperson who is just saying.
No, he is a scholar.
Exactly. He's just not putting out his statements from thin air. So when he makes statements like there are as many differences between the different manuscripts, so the Christians claim that there are 5,000 manuscripts, that is besides the point. If you do not have the autographs, the originals, or even from the manuscript from the 1st century, there is no way for anyone to identify what Jesus said from what was found in the 4th century.
Well, this is the whole scholarly study of textual criticism.
Exactly. Yes.
By comparing the manuscripts and seeing there are some small variations.
No, not small. That's what I'm telling you.
Small variations between the manuscripts.
My friend.
But by comparing them all, we can deduce what is the original version. Okay.
This is the claim of the Christians that there are only minor differences. Yeah. But if you look at the actual scholars like Bart Ehrman, what they say is that there are so many.
No.
Hear me out.
I think Bart Ehrman would agree that.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you exactly what Bart Ehrman said about the number of differences in the. Just put this away. Sorry. The variances that's found in the manuscripts. I'll tell you exactly what Bar Ehrman said. In fact, he says something like there are so many variances. There are as many variances as there are number of words in the New Testament.
Yeah, of course, there are thousands of
Exactly.
variants between the thousands of manuscripts.
So they don't agree with each other. That's the point he was making.
If you have, right, okay, there are thousands of variants between the thousands of manuscripts. Okay.
Okay.
But I think you'll find that Bart Ehrman is pretty happy about the text of the New Testament.
Even the differentiation between what I mean, the core of the belief is changed between.
Yeah. So I just want to not quote,
I'm going
misquote
to quote
him.
Bart Ehrman for you. Okay?
Yeah, go on.
I got it right. Right, this is what Bart Ehrman says in. I will just check what I'm going to quote from. So if you want to look it up, you can.
Yeah, give me the
for
reference.
yourself, okay.
I'll quote from Bart Ehrman in Misquoting Jesus.
Okay, I'm going to quote from Misquoting Jesus as well.
Okay, good. You quote first if you want, or I can go first.
Quite a long quote. I'm sorry about this, but it says Bruce. He's talking about his co-author Bruce Metzger, who is also a scholar. Okay.
Bruce Metzger was a teacher of Bart Ehrman. Did you know
That's
that?
right. Yes.
He was actually a Christian.
He studied under Bruce Metzger.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's
But
right.
Bart Ehrman left Christianity.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay,
So
carry on.
it says Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in this field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him, and even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he is a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. If he and I were put into a room, I'm losing the quote now here. If he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. Okay?
So this is not from a book. Is this a preface?
This is from Misquoting Jesus, page 252. Okay. Misquoting Jesus, page 252.
Read the last paragraph there.
So
The position
I argue for in Misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript edition of the New Testament.
So good. Now we are discussing the actual doctrines of Christianity. So the doctrines remain the same.
That's right.
Okay?
Yeah. He would say there's nothing in
but the
Christian
point that
doctrine.
we were discussing was the actual text itself. Now let's see what Bruce Metzger says. Wait.
He says that the last paragraph before that, he says that
go on.
there would only be 1 or 2 dozen places in the whole of the New Testament, where he and Bruce Metzger would disagree upon what the text of the New Testament is.
No, he says about the teachings.
No,
Read that again, the last paragraph.
That's the last paragraph. The paragraph I read before that says, if he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands.
Okay.
So he's saying although there are many thousands of places where you have variants in the manuscripts, he and Professor Metzger would have only maybe 1 or 2,000 places where they would be in disagreement about what the original text
Probably.
is.
The important point there is probably.
Of course.
So this is because he doesn't have the original.
Of course, he doesn't have the original
autographs.
manuscripts, and therefore he cannot say this is 100% certain.
Yeah.
To what
So
this
now we are going on
That's why he
probability.
uses
Now,
the word probably.
yeah, let's see what Bruce Metzger, his teacher, actually says about this. So Bruce Metzger says, sorry, where's it going? Here it is. So this is Bruce Metzger from the New Testament, a historical introduction to the early Christian writings.
Yeah.
Okay? Oh, sorry, that is Bart Ehrman actually. Let me bring up Bruce Metzger. Oh, here it is. So this is, from the same book. The text of the New Testament is transmission, corruption, and restoration.
Yeah.
This is from Bruce Metzger.
Yeah.
Okay, it says none of the original documents of the New Testament is extant, and existing copies differ from one another. The textual critic seeks to ascertain from the divergent copies which form of the text should be regarded as most confirming to the original. So you already agree that none of the originals exist.
That's
yes?
right, yeah.
And then there are...
would agree with him on that. You know, we don't have the original manuscripts as they're written
Yes.
by the original author.
And the existing copies differ from one another. Now, the important point is that Bart Ehrman, in misquoting Jesus, this is what he says. It is one thing to say that the originals were inspired, but the reality is that we don't have the originals. So saying that they were inspired doesn't help me much unless I can reconstruct the originals. This is Bart Ehrman. And then he goes on to say, moreover, the vast majority of Christians of the entire history of the church have not had access to the originals, making their inspiration something of a moot point. Okay, so you can say I'm inspired regardless of that. They don't have the originals, so your inspiration is just your claim. No. And then he goes on to say, wait, I haven't finished yet. He goes on to say, not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies of the originals. We don't even have the copies of the originals.
I think that's a bit of a claim myself. But
all copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. Let me finish and then you can say.
Yeah.
Okay?
Because
what we have, I'll let you finish. I'll let you finish. You let me finish the quote and then we can talk about, because it's important you listen to what Bart Ehrman is actually saying.
Carry on.
Okay, so what he's saying is that not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies of the originals, we don't even have the copies of the copies of the originals, or the copies of the copies of the copies of the originals. Yes? What we have are copies made later, much later. In most instances, they are copies made many centuries later. And these copies all differ from one another in many thousands of places, centuries later.
Variations,
okay, the important point there is centuries later. You know, in one video, I actually heard Bart Ehrman say,
which are used, which are centuries after. Yes, true.
You know how many centuries after?
There are some which are centuries
Most
after.
of your manuscripts are how many centuries after? Do you know?
Most of them will be, as you say, centuries after.
How many?
Yeah,
just give a guess. Go on.
Because,
take a guess.
Typically we would say there are 5,800 whatever Greek manuscripts. 5,800.
How many years after?
56, I think is the latest figure or whatever. Yeah. So
that's a good point.
Most of those would not be within the first 2 centuries.
So when is your?
They will be from 300,
what is your
500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1000 AD, etc. Yeah.
The bulk of your manuscripts is from which century? Do you know? Or after which century?
I would say probably from after 500 AD. Will probably be majority of them will definitely be from after 500 AD. I would say. Yeah?
Actually, more further than that.
Okay, I'll give it to you.
I heard Bart Ehrman actually state this.
Yes.
He said majority. He said 94% or something like that of the manuscripts of the New Testament are from the 9th century onwards.
Okay.
9th century. You know how many years? That is nearly a millennia after Jesus.
No, 800 onwards. Okay.
Yes.
700 years after Jesus.
Nearly a millennia after Jesus. Okay. Now you tell me. By the way, let me finish the last paragraph. He says. He says these copies differ from one another in so many places.
With the Quran, there are more manuscripts the later you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have everything.
That is normal.
Remember, we have 2 modes of preservation. So our most important or the primary mode of preservation has always been the oral tradition. And we have the names. We have the names of the people.
Yeah.
The chain of.
That is a problem, isn't it?
No, it's not. We have the chain of transmission. We have the chain of transmission, which means
you do not know that what you're reciting now is the same.
Of course we do. Of course we do.
In the first centuries.
In fact, we don't only know.
But you have no proof of it.
My friend, I said we have the first century manuscripts. We have the first century Al-Hijra manuscripts.
Manuscripts can prove what you're reciting.
We have the first century Al-Hijra manuscripts. You're not listening.
Yeah.
We have the first century Al-Hijra manuscripts, which you don't have from the first century. We have from the first century of our prophet. You don't have first century from Jesus.
The first century manuscripts that you're referring to probably Sana, yeah? Okay.
No, not only Sana. We have the Topkapi, the Sana. We have the Birmingham manuscripts.
First century, is it?
Sorry?
Topkapi is not from the first century of Islam.
First century Al-Hijra. It is from the first century Al-Hijra, yes.
It is from within. It is of Islam.
Of course it is.
No, it's not.
Topkapi is.
No.
Which century is it from?
I don't know. I'll have to look up. But I think that Topkapi is like late 700s or beginning of 800s, something like that.
Late 700s is the first century Al-Hijra. 570, 632.
That's almost 200 years after Muhammad.
Two Muslims never met each other, and they will recite the same Quran.
Exactly.
Well,
From
yeah,
two
of
different
course,
continents.
nowadays, because they're all reciting what was
But that was
down in the
no.
Two Muslims who will recite different things.
By the way, did he say what he said? He said because they were written down now. You know, before they were reciting the same, and many places, even today, yes, they still recite orally through the teacher. Now, wait. This is a bit we shouldn't understand. You know why most Christians, they rely only on the written and they don't give much precedence to the oral? Wait.
Objective.
No. Wait, I'll tell you why.
Trustworthy.
Shall I tell you why?
Yeah.
Because you don't have the tradition of the oral preservation.
Original language is lost.
Exactly.
We would say, yeah, you're right. We would not.
We don't have the tradition. In fact, forget about the tradition. Forget about the oral tradition. You don't even know, like the brother just pointed out, the language it was revealed to, which Jesus preached in. What language did he preach in?
Well, I think he probably spoke more than one language, okay?
No, which language did he preach in? I didn't ask you what language he spoke.
I guess a lot of the time he spoke in Aramaic.
Exactly.
Sometimes he was speaking Hebrew, maybe.
You know, you said I guess.
And
you know why you said I guess?
Yeah.
Because you're not certain. So you're not even certain about the language, let alone the preservation of the manuscripts. This is the difference between Islam and Christianity.
Yes.
We have from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the original, wait.
Yeah.
The original in Arabic, it was preserved orally.
I don't think you have the original in Arabic.
No, original language, Arabic.
Okay.
The
language.
original preservation to the letter, because we have not only the chain of the hadiths, you know, they say the chain of narrations. We have the chain of transmission. You know what that means? It means every teacher who taught his student, and that student taught his student, that chain is preserved to this day. So anyone, wait, hear me out. Anyone who is a qari, yes, the person who has the, what do you say, the qualification of teaching with the correct tajweed, with the correct pronunciation of the Quran. So not only the wording is preserved, but also its preservation is preserved. So its pronunciation is preserved. So do you not see how important it is for us to maintain even the pronunciation of every letter of the Quran? So not only preservation of the actual letters, but even the way it's pronounced. So for example, if you look at the term Yod Ha Waha of Yahweh that they usually pronounce it, this is without consonants. So when anyone says Yahweh, they are not certain whether the people at that time, during the time of Moses, actually pronounced it as Yahweh. That is the reason that most of the Jews, they will write it in the Torah, but they will never ever pronounce it, because they don't want to mispronounce the most holy name of God. Yes? The reason you know this, and many people who have studied this know this, is because it shows how important it is to get the pronunciation correct. Because mispronouncing the name of God is one of the most heinous sins they consider as. So it's committing a big sin. The same goes with the Muslims. If we mispronounce deliberately the Quran, the verses of the Quran, it can change the meaning. It can change the meaning of those particular verses, because certain terms in Arabic, like the term qalb, which is heart, and qalb, yes, to a person who's not, who doesn't know Arabic, who is not, or even the basics of Arabic, they will think that this is the same word.
It's like park and bark.
Exactly, a park and bark. Yeah, good one. So what we are, by the way, just to show you the way the Quran has been preserved is very meticulous. So the term qalb is heart, and the term qalb is dog. Yes, they might sound to an untrained ear same, but they are very different in meaning and also different in pronunciation. That is the reason it's very important for us to make sure that the words are pronounced correctly in the Quran, the letters are written correctly, and they're pronounced correctly when somebody reads it. Because even reading a statement in English, for example, the term broad in English, yes, it can have two different meanings.
Yes.
The term broad can be very wide, or it can be a woman who is not,
prostitute.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the same word, exact same pronunciation even.
Yeah.
But without the context, it loses its meaning.
Yeah.
And that is the reason, if you don't even know the original language of Jesus' preaching, can you imagine how dangerous it is?
What we have is the Greek, okay?
Exactly.
Yes, that's right, okay, which was recorded by his eyewitnesses, okay? So
Sorry, recorded by whom?
the eyewitnesses give us the Greek.
Give me one eyewitness who recorded it in
Matthew.
Greek. Where does it say Matthew recorded it in Greek?
Matthew John recorded in
No,
Greek.
these people, the
These
Greek
people wrote
wait.
the New Testament in Greek.
Have you not?
Okay.
If you look at Bart Ehrman and Metzger's statements in their books, yes, you will come to the understanding that the four Gospels, they were not written by Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. The authors the people to whom the names have been attributed. By the way, even these names, they were attributed much later on. Yes, so it says, you know, the Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Matthew. Yes, this term, this attribution was made much later on. John didn't write John. Matthew didn't write Matthew. This was written by other people who are well versed in Greek.
Would Bruce Metzger say that?
Why don't you read his book? You'll know, because you know
He
Bruce.
doesn't say that.
Well,
He
look,
doesn't say
I
that.
haven't studied Bruce
He doesn't
Metzger's,
say that.
but Bart Ehrman certainly says
Yeah,
this.
Bart Ehrman is a skeptic who makes his money by writing books.
Oh,
okay?
come on.
Okay.
After you quoted him, this is what you have to say about
I'm
him?
quoting him because you
Because he
quoted
agrees
him.
with you.
Because you were quoting him and I quoted
So
him
the
to show.
so the paragraph
to show
which
that-
agreed with you, you said it's okay to quote that, but then he says he does it for money. You know why he left Christianity?
When he wrote the book, was he Christian or not?
No, he wasn't.
No, it was not Christian when he was writing the book.
Do you know why he left Christianity?
I don't know the precise reason.
Do you think
why
it
he
was
left
after studying the Gospels or before?
Oh, he was a Greek scholar before, yeah, that's right.
No,
yeah.
but did he leave after he studied it?
Yeah,
and he realizes
he studied,
that
he studied and then he rejected.
Yeah.
Okay, it's that way around.
So that's what I'm saying. He
Right.
studied it
Yeah.
when he realized that they do not comply.
Yeah.
Yes, there's no way to substantiate what Jesus actually preached and his teachings in the 1st century to 9th century, when majority of your manuscripts are found.
Yeah.
Yes,
But
you know
Bruce
there's a
Metzger
huge
didn't
gap.
leave, did he? And he was equally a scholar. Okay.
Yeah, I did, but
Okay.
but if
So-
Bruce Metzger himself says that there are several differences between the manuscripts,
Yeah.
what does it tell you? How can you reconcile something if you don't have the originals, or even something from the 1st century? How can you do that?
Well, that's what they do. That's what textual scholars do, isn't it? Textual critical. Those scholars of textual criticism. That's what they do.
How do you
they
think
look
they
at
do
all
it?
the manuscripts and they determine what the original was.
No, they don't
And-
say.
and then
They don't say what the
Metzger
original was.
And even Bart Ehrman says that he and Bruce Metzger wouldn't disagree, other than in more than one or two dozen places.
Yeah, but his other statement in his latest book says otherwise.
I don't think so. No.
The book that was written, which is Misquoting Jesus, was
Yeah.
much later after.
Yeah, that's what I just quoted from. I just told
No,
you
actually
that's
it
where he
was-
actually says, it was from Misquoting Jesus actually told you that he says that he and Bruce Metzger
Yeah, but he was
wouldn't
talking.
agree.
He was talking about the
Okay.
teachings of or what would probably be found in the 1st century.
He was saying that if he and Bruce Metzger had to hammer out the original text of the New Testament, they would not disagree that in more than one or two dozen places.
Yeah.
At the most.
You know what?
Yeah.
Bruce Metzger was his teacher.
Yes.
Yes?
That's right.
But afterwards, when Jesus says, sorry, not Jesus, Bart Ehrman says in the same book that there are as many differences in the manuscript as there are number of words in the New Testament.
Yeah, that's right. Because there are hundreds and thousands of manuscripts, so of course there are hundreds.
So how do you
and thousands
reconcile if you have hundreds of
variations.
thousands of differences?
We know there are many variations. You know, some manuscripts they have abbreviations, which other manuscripts
No, not agree. These are
Some
major
manuscripts
differences.
Have this and the other, etc. Of course, and then there are of course mistakes that people made when they were copying. When they
These copies-
accidentally left out a word.
Yeah,
or
listen to
whatever.
this.
Yeah?
These copies differ from one another in so many places that we don't even know how many differences there are. Possibly it's easiest to put it in comparative terms. There are more differences among our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. Bart Ehrman in Misquoting Jesus. Now, the same goes with the Old Testament.
That's right. Because there are 1.5 million whatever